Well, thank you and welcome to this public forum of the Town Government Study Committee. It's January 15th, 2020, and we're holding this forum to talk about the topics we've been going into over the past few months. This committee started in 2018 and it has an expiration date as of now of June of this year. Right now we have 4 members. We're allowed to have 7, so we're always looking for volunteers to get on and discuss the topics that we're going to be talking about tonight and some additional topics. And the first person I'd like to come up here and discuss one of the main topics we've been working on, which is communication between the town and the residents, is Anthony Kennedy.
Thank you. Am I good? Okay. Hi, I'm Tony Kennedy. I moved to Norfolk just a little over a year ago, and it became obvious to me when you move to a new community that I had to find ways of understanding how things work in the town, how to get information. And so when I joined this committee with Jonathan, one of the topics that came up almost right away among us on the committee was how does the town itself communicate to the residents of Norfolk? You know, what is it that the town does to reach out to people and explain or communicate what is happening? Something as simple as, when is town meeting? Where is town meeting? If I have some huge potholes on my street, who do I call? What's the number? If I want to understand the budget of the town of Norfolk, where do I go? So we've spent quite a bit of time discussing this, and it kind of gets boiled down to this little business card sized handout. And what it refers to is that the town of Norfolk has a Facebook group. It's called facebook.com/norfolkmass.com, or MA. And then also the official website of the town of Norfolk is norfolk.ma.us. And what we're hoping to see materialize is that the various departments will continue to put information on their section of the site. So for example, if you wanted to know something, I'll use my pothole example. I mean, is the DPW going to let us know, you know, how to go about requesting something like that? And that's just a very simple example. In addition to that, I believe the budget, it will be up there, right? The current fiscal year's budget will be up there. That will explain to us, you know, how the money is spent in the town and where the money comes from, the revenues and the expenses. So one of our jobs, I believe, is to reach out to people and say, if you want to know how things work, go to one of these sites, learn about Norfolk, learn about how things are done, attend meetings, and hopefully in that way we won't be in the dark. At least we'll have some sense of connection with the town. The town itself can only do so much because the employees work hard. They're busy themselves taking care of the residents of the town. But it is our hope that they will provide periodic updates on their website So anything that they think is important that the whole community should know about, they would post on their section of the website. And, you know, this committee feels that it's doable. It's doable to have people develop a feeling that they know what's going on in the community. And we're here to help implement that and help, you know, make it possible that the town can accomplish that by reaching out to the residents. As Jonathan mentioned, we also do have vacancies on the committee. We're not certain just how much longer we're going to go, right?
We're at the pleasure of the select board.
Right, and we're hoping that they will extend our life once June 30th comes around. And the other, one more thing about communication would be that if we wanted to really understand how some of these things work in the town hall, that we would attend various meetings. For example, if we have concerns about developments or lack of development, you know, we might consider going to a zoning board of appeals meeting. We might consider going to an advisory board meeting. The people that discuss in great detail the pros and cons of the budget. You know, so if the police department puts in a budget request for whatever that number is, you know, $1 million plus, possibly, that the advisory board scrutinizes and analyzes that information and makes a recommendation. So that's another thing we could do to learn how things work. So again, if you have any questions, just talk to us. We don't know it all, but we're trying to be a conduit to reach out to the people. Yep.
Tony, a lot of people that come into town obviously come from other towns that maybe have newspapers. And I mean, I did, and one of the things that certainly we're used to reading is news in a newspaper. Exactly. Now, I'm not quite sure which newspaper actually pretends to cover Norfolk, if it's the Sun Chronicle or the Country Gazette, or I don't know what else, but they seem to do a really terrible job of it. There's never any Norfolk news. And I guess I would not understand why the town itself doesn't try to make a better effort, the town being the town management, to reach out to these newspapers, because it's a service to the residents. To see town news, events that happen in a newspaper, whether they get it, you know, you don't know how they get it, but it would be a service that I don't see the town making any effort into doing that. Because I don't see, like I said, I pick up these papers and there's never an article about Norfolk, and there's certainly enough going on in Norfolk, and when I read the inane articles about other towns, I mean, certainly we have those inane articles too, you know, but we are just not covered, and I don't quite understand why. So we talk about communication.
Right. No, that's a good thought. I mean, it's just hard to. It is hard to persuade the existing newspapers to step up their coverage. The only one I'm familiar with is a Rentham one that comes out once a month, typically in light blue print. It's how do you know, I mean...
I can answer that a little bit. The town does make outreach to the Sun Chronicle, is basically the newspaper of record for this area. They just don't care. We're not Attleboro.
Or Rentham.
But even then, towns in this area that are covered by the Sun Chronicle, you see very few articles about our towns. especially recently, I've noticed a lot about Attleboro, Seekonk, that area. I think that's just their reader base, and that's who they're doing. We don't have a local newspaper anymore. That's just the way it is.
It's tough.
Because I know that, especially like in the town clerk's office, we do, I wouldn't go so far as to say full-on press releases, but we send both the Chronicle, the Country Gazette, and there's a couple other smaller monthly publications, information. Sometimes they put it in, sometimes they don't. It's really, really up to them. So yeah, that's one of the unfortunate things with the death of old media these days.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. To follow up on that, we used to have a paper in town, the Norfolk Boomerang. For a paper. It was in town for about 10 years, and it eventually went out of business. It couldn't get the advertising, but it did cover local news in detail, at least more detail than we ever get now. Mr. Rosenberg.
Thank you. So the Boomerang actually had transitioned from print to web only for a while and then went out of business. I wanted to comment on some of the other things Tony said, in particular referring to the websites as a source for information. That can be a source of information on the community page for asking specific questions, but I don't think any of the websites are good as a source of information to learn about how government works. And I think that the suggestion of a town academy, which the way I heard it proposed, or the way I heard that it happens in Lexington, was a set of sessions for 8 consecutive weeks, one night each week, to educate citizens about the different aspects of town government. I'd like to endorse that. I have made various proposals for greater citizen engagement in town, and I think that while attend meetings is good advice, attend meetings is not an adequate way to really get involved. And I would like to see more, an avenue for more active participation there's some proposals I've made and proposals other people have made. I'd like to see them.
Well, the challenge is to identify, the venue or how you would go about that, right? I mean, as a committee, the more we can focus in on suggestions like that.
So the proposals that have been made have, in fact, details about how to do that. Okay. And in particular, one that falls under the name of participatory budgeting, though it was more than just budgeting, would have people in town meet and talk about which projects were worth doing, which projects were worth stopping, how they would trade off resources between things. So that's more active engagement. In the case of the way this is done in another municipality, those recommendations are non-binding, but they are active engagement on the part of citizens and recommendations.
With the advisory board, you're suggesting, right? By attending advisory board meetings, would that be one way of doing that?
Possible, but that's the attending meetings of another group. This proposal was not attending meetings of another group. It was having a number of citizens convened, not at anybody else's meeting, but in order to discuss things going on and make recommendations about relative priorities.
just like to commend the town on the website. I think it's a pretty good website. You can select what committees you're interested in. You'll get a notification of the meetings. You'll get a calendar which will show what's scheduled for the committees that you're interested in. One of the problems is that, and it's a problem in every town, is the minutes of the meeting are usually delayed like months before they actually show up. And I realize it has to be drawn up, has to be voted on by the committee, and then posted.
Yeah.
But the agenda should be available on the website. And probably, I don't know whether you post meeting notices at the town hall or in the library within so many hours of the meeting. At least the people who don't have a computer or they're not savvy, they can at least say, okay, I go downtown, oh, there's a meeting going to be held here, I see it, I might want to go. And
You mean on the day before the meeting, or?
I think it was like 48 hours.
Okay.
The open meeting
48
law
hours.
says 48 hours.
48 hours before the meeting, you had to have something posted at town hall, and probably on the website it has to be.
Mhm.
But the trick was that the minutes, what's really important, but usually it lags behind the actual meetings. You really don't get a sense of what happened at the meeting, and that's pretty important. You can go to the meeting, and you still didn't get everything that was said, or the innuendos about something, you know.
Anthony, what is, there is no fixed deadline for committees to turn in their minutes, is there?
Well,
There's a
I'll start at the beginning. So all
Yeah.
meetings are, the official posting place for all town meeting, or official public meetings is My Town Government, which is a link off of the website. That's the official posting place. Towns are allowed to do it electronically. I hear what you're saying about getting paper copies. I mean, I'll bring that to
It's not a big deal.
but it does make sense that there are enough people who don't have computers and would like to know meetings. It's just, sometimes there can be a lot of meetings, and sometimes those agendas do get updated right up to the 48 hours before. Logistically, it might be a little difficult, but that's definitely something I think we could start pursuing. As far as the minutes.
Getting the minutes on the website.
Well, all the minutes that are filed with the town clerk are on the website. I file them. I put them up there pretty much the day I get them. The lag is because the minutes have to be approved. You have to have a subsequent meeting of that committee to review the minutes and approve them. So there's always going to be a lag. That's how public meetings are. Specifically with some of the bigger boards, or not bigger boards, more important boards, select board, ZBA, on the town clerk's page with the minutes, I have a section for the meeting minutes and the video of the actual meeting. So even before I have minutes, there's always a link that you can go back. If NCTV covered the meeting, you can watch it. The second I have the minutes, I put them right next to it, so you can actually look at the minutes while watching the meeting. With the select board, they've now started having the select board packets that have all the various paperwork that the selectmen are actually looking at up at that table. I actually put a link to that. So as much information as is given, we try to make available as soon as possible.
You might want to have like a training session for citizens to come in and back the computer there and show them what you can do, because there's probably a lot of stuff that's hidden.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you say the website's good. It's only okay. It's clunkier than I would like it. I would love to have the meeting minutes a little bit more centrally located and all that kind of stuff.
I think
But
one of the other things you could do as far as getting the word out and getting people information is to use video. Not only, you probably have a program like Norfolk Happenings or What's Going On, where a narrator would interview one of the town officials in maybe an hour-long session, and they would ask questions and
as sponsored by the town or the town people?
well, the cable station, you know.
Because I know previous selectmen have done that. The previous town administrator, they had like a little bit of a show that they would go on. I mean, that's can be brought to their attention. That's up to them. And if somebody independent of the town wants to interview them, that's completely up to the citizens, and they can invite whoever they want.
It's another bit of technology you could use.
Just one comment to that, minutes. Unapproved draft minutes are still public records. And even though you can't get approved minutes until they're voted on and approved, one can, under the public records law, request copies of unapproved draft minutes.
How do you request it?
Anthony, can you answer that question?
I really wish you could bring it up because it's, your first bet is to contact the board or committee. You got to see what condition minutes are in, because a lot of times it's straight just notes and stuff like that. They don't have even draft minutes at that point yet.
But there is a video.
Well, again, if it's been videoed by NCTV, it's on the NCTV YouTube site, and I try to link it on the town's website as fast as possible. Your first bet would be to ask the committee or board just to see if they have a copy of draft minutes. The alternative route is, I'm also the record access officer for the town. You can do a full-on public records request. That, it takes time. There's 10 days.
There should be a limit as to how long the lag is between we had a meeting.
It has to be done as,
3 weeks to get the minutes.
it depends on the next meeting.
But so that it's not 2 or 3, 4 months.
It's not allowed to be that long.
What?
It's not allowed to be that long. I believe its open meeting is,
I think 90 days.
it's like, it's 90 days or the next meeting, they generally have to approve. Sometimes it might not be the immediately next meeting, but they're not allowed to, there should never be 4 months that the minutes aren't done. There are boards and committees that, especially in the past, don't have full minutes. We're trying to get some of that done.
Sometimes the longer it takes, the more fuzzy it gets.
Yeah.
People forget what they said.
And a consequence of working in the town clerk's office that I've learned is part of it because of the nature of some of these boards and committees. They're volunteer citizens. They're not, a lot of times when people think of boards and committees, they're thinking of selectmen, zoning, stuff like that. Well, there's the historic commission. There's some of these small boards, RAC. Well, they're not quite small, but that sometimes becomes the issue is that, so-and-so is busy, they have a job. And us in the town clerk's office have to sometimes start trying to track down minutes, and they've got to be submitted in a timely manner to us. So one, if you ever come across a board or committee and you're looking for minutes, contact the town clerk's office. I might not have put them online. Some of the smaller boards, I don't have the time to actually go by and put up all their committee meeting minutes. If you want them, we have them. They get filed with us.
How about the agendas, though?
All the agendas are on My Town Government. They have those, that's where they stay. That's their official posting place.
By department, by board?
By board, yep.
Well,
So,
by meeting.
By meeting, if you don't post an agenda, you can't have a meeting.
yeah, everything has an agenda, and those agendas stay there. They can be printed from there.
Maybe one of our items could be some sort of video training thing, like you were saying, just a 5-minute snippet. I'll record it, something like that, where we go.
Well, it happens. I mean, the advisory board is now putting up minutes for 2019, 2018, and 2017. Wow. So it happens. Now, that's a very important board. It's probably the second most important board after, or third more, maybe after planning and the select board. And they did not have minutes posted. That's unacceptable. And it was allowed to go on, clearly, because it didn't happen. And I don't know if it only happened when I sent a threatening note to the town manager saying that they were a violation of open meeting law. And now they're suddenly getting done. But that's unacceptable to the citizens of the town. That's right. It's not. Forget about breaking a law. It's not acceptable to the residents of the town. And there seems to be no one that's monitoring that. Well,
Do you think that's gotten better?
Well, it is getting better. They're putting it up. I just went to the last meeting and they were approving 2019 and going into 2018, all like in bulk, right? Because of sometimes, I'm just saying, in general, it's just not acceptable. How that particular one happened, I don't know. I don't know the characters involved, but I'm just saying, it certainly it happened. It was allowed to happen.
And so, as Anthony said, when you have unpaid part-time volunteers who have other things to do,
That's
have
not an
lives to-
excuse. It's Sorry, that's not an excuse.
I'm sorry, you're saying it's unacceptable.
Yeah.
Unacceptable, you need to say what you're going to do about it. I mean, you can have a committee resign. I mean, all the members resign because they don't have time to do it. I mean,
That's up to the select board and the town administration, the town administrator to figure that out. That's not up to me to figure out.
well, if you're the one who's saying it's unacceptable,
It's
then you
unacceptable
should
to the
provide a
open
solution.
meeting law. It's unacceptable to the residents of the town. It's not unacceptable to me.
Okay, the open meeting law is a legal issue.
Yeah.
And when you say it's unacceptable to the town, you need to propose some way to get this done with part-time unpaid volunteers. It's difficult. You can't order part-time unpaid volunteers to do things because if they don't like what they're being ordered to do, they just leave. It's a hard problem. I'm not offering a solution, but I'm saying it's unacceptable doesn't really advance things.
Well, obviously, we still have stuff to do on communication. But we have some other topics that we'd like to discuss tonight, present. And the next topic is recall, potential recall provision for the town of Norfolk.
Thank you, sir. My notes are over there. I'll go off of memory. Recall off of recollection. My name's Gary Sullivan. I'm a 5-year resident here in Norfolk. Thank you all very much for coming out. And one of the things that we talked about, well, we talked about a lot of things, was recall. And a lot of discussion about what's the historical precedent of recall. Is it something that Norfolk really needs to consider? And so in doing research for this, there is a lot of historical precedent for recall. Historically, we could go as far back as the Greeks in Athens. They had a recall provision, and certain countries like Switzerland and India, that's built into their constitutions. The United States has no such thing. Some states do, Michigan does, Massachusetts does not. So recall is something that's entirely up to the electorate. Very interesting the way that recall would work, right? So imagine a situation where you want a elected position to be recalled. You no longer want that person to be in that position they were elected to. The process, it's dictated by the recall committee, but usually it's something similar to get signatures of 25% of the voting electorate. That means the people that voted in the last election that want to have this elected position recalled. Once that 25% threshold is met, and it's an arbitrary number, but mostly you're going to see 25%, that would go to a town election. Keep in mind, town elections are costly. We actually have to have a full election to see whether or not this person wants to be recalled, and if so, who would step in their place. So because of that, you do not actually see a lot of towns either having recall as a provision or enacting recall if they do have that provision. It's costly, it's time consuming, and it doesn't work, but oftentimes it is there. Some recent examples, Narragansett, Rhode Island just initiated or just added a recall provision. It has not been used yet, but the townspeople thought it would be a good idea to have it in future. Seabrook, New Hampshire, they encountered an issue years ago, 4 years ago now, where they actually voted to have a recall provision, and the state Supreme Court said that was unconstitutional. They cannot do that. So New Hampshire does not have any towns that have a recall provision, and Seabrook was the one that tried to get that through, and it didn't work. Uxbridge, Massachusetts, has had a long-standing attempt at having a recall provision, going all the way back to 2012. It finally got voted on by the electorate in 2014, and the select board refused to take it up. Finally got into their bylaws this past, so January of 2019. Also has not been used, and I've mentioned that a couple of times because it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? There's pros and cons of recall. The pros would be something along the lines of if bribery and corruption is a concern of yours, it puts those elected positions in check for that, because the electorate has the power to take their position away from them. But the cons are worth considering as well. There are people that may not feel like they want to step up to an elected role because of the ability for the electorate to make an impassioned but potentially incorrect choice to recall that person. That's more or less the second con as well, is we all have judgment. We do our due diligence to make sure that we are judging people fairly, but oftentimes we don't have the correct information, or we kind of get caught up in the moment. We make bad decisions, but that's on the electorate, and we can all live with that. This board takes no position on whether Norfolk needs recall, but it was brought to our attention. We did look at it, and it's something that we really want to hear from the citizens of Norfolk. Is this something that you would want, or is this something that anybody's considered or felt the need for in their time here in Norfolk? We are a small town. We still, we're growing every day, but we still are a small town, and would love to hear any feedback you have on recall.
How does cause work into this? How does cause work into this? Cause being someone's embezzling money, or they committed a crime of their own. I mean, how does cause come into this, or are you just are you talking about, geez, I suddenly decided I don't like this guy and we want to recall him? So could you just clarify that?
Sure.
Please.
Yes, so the way that most recall provisions are set up, there's no need for cause, which is, the heavier side of that double-edged sword. It can be the pendulum swings too heavy one way for a number of different reasons. We would like to believe that the wisdom of crowds is going to lead people to make a decision based off of some cause. But in theory, it doesn't really need cause, as long as you have 25% of, or whatever arbitrary, it could be 10%. But as long as you have a number of citizens willing to sign off on a recall to happen, it could happen. And it could happen for the wrong reasons, then again, it could happen for the right reasons.
Do we have a provision, do we have a provision in our bylaws that talks about an elected official committing some offense? We have nothing like that?
We have, that's a recall. If an elected, we have no way of removing an elected official in town from a board or committee.
Okay.
Sir.
So you asked for an expression of opinion. My opinion is it would be good to have a recall provision in our bylaws.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on that? Or you don't
sure.
have to?
Thank you. So I think that a recall provision, if it exists, should not be used or very rarely used. I would not be anxious to see people recalled at all. But I think having no recourse now is a vulnerable position, and having the possibility of recall if necessary. I was told of one elected committee member who never did anything, never showed up at meetings, never participated in discussions, never participated in votes, but nonetheless occupied a position that nobody else could occupy because he was elected and just chose to do nothing. So recall for inactivity, I guess, would be a possibility. Certainly recall for malfeasance, for criminal acts seems to be more desirable than allowing a convicted criminal to remain in office because you can't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to what you said, it's when we do see this provision added to town, city bylaws, it's rarely actually enacted, right? And I think there's good faith in the citizenry to not just get the pitchforks out and decide somebody's out of there because they're driving a nicer car than you or something, So, anybody else have any thoughts or opinions on that?
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I guess one of the things is it's good in that you can remove somebody for inaction. It's bad because it does get costly. An advantage that we have, because we don't have one, if we wanted to add one, we could tailor the language to create a high threshold so that it's not done in arbitrary way, without, you can write in the bylaw specifically for recall that it can only be recalled for cause. So if you wanted to add a recall provision or bylaw, but you didn't want it just because somebody decided that they didn't like somebody, only for, I'll just throw out high crimes and misdemeanors, but we'll probably go through a little bit lower threshold for Norfolk. That is a possibility. Generally, you break up these signatures by voting precinct, and that creates a little bit of a higher threshold. Again, you don't want one neighborhood coming in and being like, oh, we're recalling everybody, or one part of the town. It has to be a kind of a consensus that we're gonna have to do it. I will, again, reemphasize the cost. Having an election is expensive, and you hold a recall election and in voting the new person in at the same time. So that can have a significant cost. Generally, there's a sour grapes provision in one of these. You can't recall somebody within 6 months after they're elected, because that's just not fair, or 6 months from an election. I've seen that in a lot of the bylaws. That just, again, somebody who loses then just starts a recall campaign. Nobody wants that. So.
Perhaps you can elaborate on how much the election really costs?
Honestly, offhand, I can't say. It's several $1,000s. I mean, it's staffing, there's computer programming that has to be done, ballots that have to be printed. It's not a cheap endeavor to hold an election in town.
I think what comes to mind is really, when I think of elected, is I think of our select board. I mean, we only have 3, and these are the people that govern our town. So if we had one that was not doing the job or shouldn't be in there doing the job for whatever the cause was, I mean, the cost really becomes incidental when we don't have the people running our town. You know, I'm not talking about a low-level type of board member or something. I mean, what comes to mind to me is really our select board. You know, what would be our recourse if it came down to, we only have 3, if one of them wasn't functioning properly? What do we do? You know, we're crippled, you know, and I think from that perspective, it's valid, you know, to have some provision to run our town. When we're really we could be very vulnerable.
I have a question for Tony. How many voters is 25%? What's the number? 3,000?
Yeah, say about 3,000.
3,000.
What was the answer?
About 3,000.
Is 25%?
We have. Well, no, that's not.
Oh, voting.
Yeah,
sorry.
so I would say we roughly probably have about 8,000 voters. So 25%, so 2,000.
Is that high?
Not evenly dispersed among the town, though. Different precincts have different.
This is a question, not a statement. I'm interested in whether the Government Study Committee considered impeachment, whether impeachment is possible even in Massachusetts.
I've never heard of that. What would the impeachment be? As in, we officially disapprove of your actions, but not remove you from office?
No. So that's a sanction to say you disapprove the action. Impeachment would be removal from office, but not by vote of residents.
Cannot be done.
Cannot be done.
If they are elected to a position, they have to be removed by the ballot box.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions. Anybody else? Well, again, thank you very much for coming. And who's on tap next?
I guess I am.
All right. Do you want both mics or just one?
Stereo. Is this working?
Can you
Okay.
talk about anything else, like town meeting?
We have 4 things to go through.
Yeah,
Four things?
we've talked about stuff we'll get to that, about town meeting. The next topic was term limits that we looked at.
Tom Sawyer.
And, no, I wasn't thinking of him. We came up with that before he did.
He talks about it every day.
Basically, at the local level, it came up because people had said to us that they were intimidated against running against an incumbent that had been in office year after year. And they were concerned that they want fresh blood to be able to be involved without spending a lot of money on running a campaign against an incumbent, for example, or the time it takes for name recognition. So we did a little investigation about term limits, and I found one community that does have term limits. And the way it works in that community is you can be on a board for 3 terms or 9 years. And then there's a cooling off period where you have to be off the board for a year before you can run again. And that seemed to be a reasonable length of time for somebody to be on a board. Then the issue came up, well, we have a lot of boards, we can't even find people to be on them. We have elections where we have blanks where people run for office and they get into office with 5 votes, which is the minimum.
Yep.
I'm told you have to have 5 votes or you don't get the position, even if it's not, you can't just get it with 1 or 2. You and your spouse can't get elected to a board. You need a few neighbors to help you out. So the issue became maybe term limits should only apply to the major boards, the select board, the school committee, and the planning board. We really can't impose term limits on appointed boards because those are, the elected boards have jurisdiction over appointing those people, and for some boards, the terms are regulated by the state. For example, the Zoning Board of Appeals is a 5-year term, and that's a state law because they want that board to be insulated from the political winds that blow here and there over time. So we've looked at term limits, and I think we need some more input from the community about how they feel about it. Being a former elected official myself, I impose term limits on myself anyway. I only served 6 years on the school committee and 3 years on the select board, and 5 years on the advisory board, and 1 year on the King Philip School Committee. But it's a matter of how people really feel, whether or not there's really a necessity to have different people on boards over time, or whether or not, if people are happy with who's on the board, that people should be allowed to stay on for more than a certain number of years. So we'd like to hear your input on that.
Does it depend on the length of the term? Somebody's elected for 12 months versus somebody who's elected for 3 years.
Well, all our terms right now are 3 years in Norfolk. We don't have any, the moderator used to be 1-year term, but now it's 3 as well.
All elected
Boards
positions
are
are
3 years, except for housing authority, which is 5 years by state statute. So it's a matter of whether you consider 3 years to be too long or too short, or a series of terms to be sufficient or insufficient.
I'm ambivalent about this for exactly the reasons Jonathan said, namely, on the one hand, there is difficulty getting people to run for positions, and on the other hand, it is the case that once an incumbent is in for a while, it's hard to run against that incumbent. He has a number of advantages. I think, despite my ambivalence, I probably come down in favor of term limits, but I definitely see an argument against it also.
Just for full disclosure, I did run against an incumbent the first time I ran for office, and it was a very contentious election back in 1991, and I managed to prevail, but it was, I had to do an awful lot of work, and I didn't want to spend too much money. I kept it down to about $100, I think, for flyers, but my wife went all over town distributing the flyers to every household in town. And that's what it took. Plus, there were several contentious issues going on in the town at the time. There were 17 override questions on one ballot. And the select board had a four-way race for one seat. School committee, which is the office I ran for, was four running for two. Planning board, I think, had 3 running for 1, and right down the list. And Norfolk hasn't really seen that kind of activity since. I mean, it was a good thing in one way because people were activated and involved. But on the other hand, it was because there were so many explosive issues going on in town at the same time, which you necessarily don't want going on at once. Any other comment on term limits?
Yeah, my opinion is I would be concerned probably about the two boards being planning and board and the select board, because these are boards that determine policy. And you know, the downside could be is you get a board that stays in there all the time and policy never changes, and that may be good and may be bad. You know, you don't know, but you don't have the opportunity to look at other policies. So I would say that those two boards, and what would be a reasonable term for me is probably 2. 1 term, 3 years, you're learning the job, you know, and then the second term, you're just really getting into it. But, so I would not say 1 term, I would say 2 terms, but I would think those two boards would be important to me. And then maybe the moderator even also, because the moderator is determining the advisory board. So, and the advisory board has a very key role. So that's a policy. I'll say that's a policy, although it's not policy per se, but it may be those 3 positions: moderator, select board, and planning. That would be my input.
Thank you.
You said at the beginning that we're only looking at term limits of elected boards because appointed boards, the appointing authority makes a decision. I would have imagined that the bylaws could limit an appointing authority to a number of terms for a single individual. Is there any comment on whether that would be acceptable to the Attorney General, and whether the Town Government Study Committee considered the possibility of bylaw changes to impose term limits on appointed boards?
I really haven't drilled down deeply into the appointed board issue. However, we had one in town a few years ago where we had Council on Aging, and we had a problem getting people on it because they kept passing on. And it was an issue of that board had some issues regarding whether or not there should be a limit on service or not.
I believe, to answer your question, yes, I believe you can write into the bylaws that, you know, a person cannot be appointed for more than 2 terms, because we just got that taken out of the Council on Aging's bylaw because they weren't getting enough people.
So you know, I have the same ambivalence about appointed boards as I do about elected boards, but I'd like to suggest that the Town Government Study Committee consider whether that might be appropriate for appointed boards.
Okay, another topic we've been considering is the relationship between the select board and the advisory board and the town administrator or manager, whatever you want to call it. The term, it's town manager and town administrator, they're just terms that are bandied about. They don't have any legal significance on having different powers. The powers of a town administrator vis-a-vis a select board, vis-a-vis an advisory committee is based on what the town decides. And whether or not there should be bylaws about who has what responsibility is a question that to be considered, whether or not there even should be a difference in powers, whether or not it should be codified, or whether it should be based on the personalities of the people that are involved at the time and how well they work together on various issues. But I would give you one example. The school committee is governed by Chapter 70 of the Mass General Laws, and that board does not only has the power to hire and fire the superintendent. They have no other powers in terms of personnel. The superintendent hires the principals, and the principals hire the teachers. And this was instituted about 30 years ago in order to change the dynamic of what the state wanted school committees to do. They didn't want them going in and having 3-hour arguments about who should be the athletic director at the high school, or the football coach, or a particular teacher that people might have a grievance with. They want the school committee to be making policy, as has been said earlier this evening, and consider overall what kind of school system do we want, and direct the superintendent in terms of things like class size, other issues like that, policies in general. And that's really what it's supposed to be about. They're supposed to be up there at the proverbial 50,000 feet to relate to all the issues that affect them. For example, our school committee will be coming forward the next year or so with a provision for adding on to the Freeman Kennedy School because of increased enrollment. Well, they're getting information from teachers through parent councils, through the principal to the superintendent, who then gives the information to the school committee, and the school committee has to make a decision about whether or not to bring proposal forward to the town, what kind of proposal, how much they want to spend on it, working with the state to see what kind of reimbursement they might get, and so on. Perhaps something like that could be done in terms of the relationship between the select board, the town administrator, and the advisory board as to who has what functions in terms of budget and policy. For example, the town administrator might be responsible for having the departments draft their budgets, reviewing their budgets based on a recommendation by the select board that says we want a budget that's 2% less than last year, or not to exceed 2 or 3%, but not in the details of how we get there. That select board isn't necessarily set up to look at every line item. I'll probably get in trouble with them now for saying that. But I believe that that is something that we have to consider, and that other responsibilities the town administrator might have is, instead of the select board deciding whether or not the garden club can have a plant sale on Town Hill on a certain date, that's something that the town administrator can handle, and that the select board is concerned primarily with dealing with policy issues in the interests of the town going forward. The other part of that relationship is the advisory board. Now, we did get some people who couldn't be here tonight sent us some ideas on that, and one of them was that there be a separate finance committee, that their only job is to deal with financial matters for town meeting. Another way to look at it would be there's only a finance committee, there's not an advisory board anymore. There isn't a first motion about all articles in the warrant. A town I grew up in only had a finance committee. They did the budget, they did the capital, and I guess these days they probably do the CPC articles as well. or anything that required an appropriation or a transfer of money. Other articles were allowed, the proponent, whether it's the planning board or the petitioner, was allowed to present their article as a positive motion. And then somebody could get up and move to IP it. But at least that person or board would have a chance to present their article. And if they decided they didn't want their article, that they had read the tea leaves, they could be the ones to go ahead and IP their own article, like the planning board did at this last town meeting on the B1 district articles. So that's another thing that we're kind of looking at, and whether or not that should be in a bylaw or not remains to be seen. Obviously, we have a new town administrator and pretty much a new board, and they're working through how they're doing that relationship anyway right now. So that's something that I think we're going to look at. And now another one that another comment that we got on a different matter is to reinstitute the permanent building committee that we had in town that was abolished 30 years ago on an article that I wrote. So full disclosure here, I was partly responsible for doing away with the permanent building committee. I understand that the reasoning behind this is that we have issues right now regarding building projects, and that the current system appears not to be working. This is something that just came to our attention, so as a board, we haven't researched this particular issue yet. But we wanted to let you know that that was a comment that was given to us today, actually.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
I thought I saw, and I think in the bylaws, Article 3, that there is a call for a building committee.
Right, and how that building committee works is it's not a permanent building committee of members, it's by project.
Right, it's by project, so any project that's over 5% of whatever the town budget requires a building committee.
A building, that's right, a building committee, which is composed of, let me see if I remember it right.
It calls out who's.
It calls out who's to be on it,
Right.
and part of the reason why it was set up that way is some of the members of that committee to be formed are people that have a stake in the project, for
They can't have a
example.
quorum, that's the way it states.
That I can't,
The people that have a stake in it, let's say.
right,
the
they don't
school,
have a quorum.
They can't
Yeah.
have a quorum.
But the way it worked previously was they had nobody on that committee at all. It was just 3 members from the community. And that didn't seem to work because there'd be a cross purposes. And for example, a school committee or whatever could say, you know, we don't like what you're doing, and because they don't have a stake in it, there's no incentive to compromise or collaborate or anything, but just sit back and throw rocks at the committee. And that's the basic reason why I advocated for a committee, separate committee for each project.
So when you spoke about this, so are you talking about the possibility of putting back a permanent building
That's
committee
what
for
the
every
comment,
project?
that's what the comment was.
Okay.
And we haven't looked at that to see maybe things have changed over 30 years and now it's time to revisit that or not. We're not, we have, as I said, we just got this today.
Yeah, okay.
But I do know there's projects in the pipeline, so that's something we can look at and look at the pros and cons of
Yeah.
going back to the old way or just maybe tweaking the current system that we have.
Can we go back, sorry, do you have comments on the building committee?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I wanted to change that. I won't, sorry.
It would seem to be an Cage's idea to have a permanent building committee that included people who had special skills, legal skills, engineering skills, finance skills, and maybe you have some people who are just regular citizens who want to comment on it. But if you have this board and they continued over a period, and they get involved with all of the major projects that the town's going to have, you're going to build up some kind of an educated base of people who know what somebody else is planning to do and what this project is happening. If you put it all in one place, I think you might be more you might get more value out of it rather than doing one ad hoc for every project.
Thanks. Comments on two of the things that were mentioned. With respect to a finance committee, in addition to or instead of an advisory committee, I think a finance committee makes sense to me, and probably I would be in favor of a finance committee instead of an advisory committee. So, with respect to the relationship between the select board and the town administrator, I think things are in a real state of flux currently, and therefore I think it's premature to write anything into
Well,
the bylaws.
I think we would agree with that.
About that. So, and it's also the case that some of the authorities that the select board has, the select board could delegate to the town administrator if the board chose. So I think the absence of the bylaws delegating that to the town administrator don't preclude the select board itself delegating it to the town administrator.
Right, it's a matter of whether or not you really want it to always be in flux, or whether or not a certain way of doing things kind of gels, and that way you want to codify that and permanently make that the way things are run.
I want to second David's comments about the advisory board versus a finance board. It's almost a little bit, it's hard to understand. We call it an advisory board, and yet they're reviewing budgets and making recommendations at town meeting on the spending of money and the spending and the approval of budgets. So it really is a finance committee. Let's call it what it really is, and what it's doing. The crazy thing about it is if you look at the bylaw, we call it to have an advisory committee, but there's no requirements as to the qualifications for the people on that advisory board, whether it's an advisory board or a finance board. So right now they're operating as if they're a finance board, but there's no requirements for qualifications. So the town moderator is at will to put whoever he wants on that board, or she wants on that board. And we and I'm talking as a resident, we're relying on this board to look at some really complex financial matters, because town government is not easy to understand. It's very different than business government, business operations and budgeting. It's a more complicated process because you have a lot more involved. And we're relying on these people to give us a recommendation to vote at town meeting, and we don't even know what their qualifications are because there's none required. It doesn't make any sense at all. You wouldn't go to a tax preparer's or a certified accounting firm or a firm that's going to claim to do your business arrangements and not know what their qualifications are. You just wouldn't do it. Why do we do it as a town? It doesn't make any sense at all.
Because it's democracy. It's residents participating.
Sorry?
It's because it's residents participating.
But that's fine in town meeting. That's fine to have residents participating. But we're relying on these people's recommendation. So we're assuming that they have the qualifications to make a recommendation to us as voters going into town meeting, that they have the qualifications to make a qualified recommendation. That's our assumption. So it's not unreasonable that we should say that those people that are going to give us a recommendation have the qualifications to make that recommendation.
How do you limit a citizen's ability to participate in their own government?
Sorry?
How do you limit a citizen's ability to participate in their own government?
That's town meeting.
Well,
That's
but,
town
but,
meeting.
but it's not. It's
Yes, it
participating
is.
on a committee, it's
No,
participating on a
no,
board.
town meeting is the residents participating in the running of the town. The boards have a certain requirement. They're given bylaws, or they're given marching orders. They all have their rules that they operate within. Every board does. I'm on boards in other towns. You have your bylaws, and that's what you operate within. If I'm on the planning board, I can't do something for the historical commission. I have my rules. So I don't understand why it's not unreasonable that the advisory board, whether we call it advisory or finance, doesn't have a requirement that they are qualified to make the recommendations that we're looking to them to make, that we're relying on them to make. They sit through the budget review meetings. They confer with, I would assume, the town manager, the town finance manager, the select board. Why would we assume that they have the qualifications to be able to do that? Is that unreasonable?
I believe it is, yes.
In Massachusetts, can you require qualifications for something like that? I'm not even sure if it's,
I don't
like,
think you can.
ZBA hopes to have people of a certain qualification, but I don't think they can, I hear what you're saying, I'm empathetic towards it, and I agree with you to a certain extent. I just think that because of the whole democracy thing, we can't force guide rails into the qualification aspect of it. I think that boards do their job. So I've listened to Chris Weider talk about this with ZBA, where he's looking for specific people with specific skill sets. You know, he has to take who he gets. He doesn't have to take who he gets, but oftentimes select board will, out of necessity, vote people without those qualifications because nobody's there. So yeah, maybe that's something that could be brought up. I'm not sure what the proper venue is to bring it up.
Well, yeah, so advisory is done by the moderator. So
Right.
in that, it's up to the moderator and who you elect as a moderator. If you feel strongly that people on advisory should have a certain set of qualifications, you make sure that the person you elect as moderator believes that.
Yeah.
That would be the way to do it. I really don't think you can throw
You put that in
qualifications
bylaws?
within bylaws like that. And who determines that? I mean, you're sitting on a finance committee. Do you have to have a CPA? Why does that, why does being, say, an accountant make you better than a lawyer, or somebody who doesn't have a college degree but has spent the past 50 years working in town government? It becomes a very slippery slope with that. I didn't mean to get slip when I said, no, it's unreasonable. I more meant it along the lines, that's something to talk to the moderator candidates about, and, if you want to run for moderator, if that's something you believe strongly in, run for moderator. I mean, that's you, the moderator
No,
controls the advisor.
I'm talking about the bylaws. That's what we're talking about. Could the bylaws have that requirement? Because the bylaws are what sets up the advisory board. It's dictated in our bylaws. So all I'm asking is could that requirement of setting up an advisory board or a finance board have that requirement in it as well?
And I don't believe so, but I mean, that's definitely something to research.
I don't believe so, but we'll look into that.
Yeah.
There may be other ways that other towns have, without explicitly
Yeah.
stating that, found ways to guide that sort of behavior. So yeah, we'll certainly do
We
the
had a
research.
moderator, Frank Groves, who was moderator for about 30 years, and he always had a diverse board. He always made sure that there were a couple of people on it that had some financial background. And those people would go in and discuss things with the town administrator and be the one that would go to the select board meetings when they were talking about money. And he would participate in that and come back to I was on the advisory board then when we had this setup. And the idea is to have a cross-section of citizens of all different abilities. I suppose if we go to a finance or FinCom model, it might be something I don't think we could put put in who could be on it in terms of their resume. But I think that there would be a strong sense if the town passed such a thing that the moderator would consider that those people do have a financial or a business background.
You know, in my mind, a committee, say the permanent building committee, you should have somebody on the board who knows construction. You should know somebody else who's got something to do with finance. You can also have just citizens at large who can be members of the committee just to give their input. But you need to have some technical background to make a good decision. Otherwise, you're just a bunch of, you know, guys that like to talk about stuff and don't have the background. And you waste a lot of time.
Okay, well, we'll look into that. Of course, a lot of things about, I know this has come up because of a current project that's had difficulties. But since that's still in litigation or anything, we can't really get to the bottom of what really went on to be able to make an intelligent decision about how a building committee should be, whether it should be changed from the present structure.
I got a quick question for Ed. Is there anything that the current advisory board has failed to do or that you think was wrong or
No,
that exhibited
it's got
their...
nothing to do with the existing board. I don't know them, you know, I'm new to
Right,
town.
no.
It's just a concept, I'm just talking about the concept.
Okay.
That, because I understand what their role is, you know, now that I'm learning, and as we're coming into budget season, they review the budgets with the department heads, and they provide the recommendation at town meeting to the residents as to the right way to vote, whether to pass or not. So I'm really just going on that. I don't know the advisory board. It's got nothing against any
Right,
member
no, I
on.
was just trying to figure
No,
out if there
no,
was
no.
some instance
No,
of something that made you think that...
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, it's just a concept.
All right,
It's just a
that's
concept.
So if the study committee is going to consider the FinCom versus advisory board issue, I guess I'd ask that you also think about whether it would be better to have an elected FinCom versus an appointed FinCom.
I know that's one possibility that
Yeah,
you can
and I'm
have.
not advocating anything, I'm just saying an interesting question that would be opened by deciding that there was interest in going to a FinCom.
I don't think we'll have a warrant article for you on that because the warrant closes February 13th, which is very early.
I hope this committee will be extended.
Yes, because stuff we're working on, we would have been, you know, March would have been a good time for us to have stuff ready to bring forward, but February, we only have, we're meeting again on January 29th to sort of review what goes on here tonight and consider where we go from there. I know somebody had a question about town meeting.
I have several questions. Number one, does the town meeting have to have a quorum to vote on money?
No, there's no quorum requirement in Norfolk.
Is there a reason why?
Never had one.
Huh?
We've never had one.
Never
We've never had a quorum. Some towns don't have quorums for town meeting. Some do, some don't. That's just.
But that could be something that we can consider. That's a bylaw we can do.
Well, there should be, I don't know
What kind
the
of
number
number
that
did
you
you
have,
have
but
in
there
mind?
should be a minimum attendance.
Yeah, well, that's what a quorum would be.
Well, a quorum is a majority of something, so it would be a majority of voters.
Quorum for town meeting is the minimum required to in attendance.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
So-
how it's defined in Massachusetts.
So we could
law.
have 5 people show and that they could vote on anything, right?
Yep.
That's the way it works.
Usually the moderator, in his or her discretion, has, for example, I remember a town meeting delayed because the Bruins were in the Stanley Cup final that week, and another one because the Red Sox were in the World Series, and the moderator knew that they wouldn't get the crowd, and 3 people showed up, the moderator and a couple of people in the audience, and they agreed, and it was scripted that they would adjourn the town meeting to another date.
And I remember one where there was terrible weather.
Yes.
And very few people showed up, and they basically, the only action they took was to adjourn to a later date.
To another date.
I think you ought to have a quorum, you ought to meet somehow to get to the electorate and the people in town and say, look, you've got to come out, this is your government, you've got to participate, you just can't sit at home and watch TV. And
Part of the
get the
problem.
young people educated, that's public, that's a duty that they have to
What
attend
kind of
these meetings and
what
make
kind of
judgments.
number did you have in mind?
Say again?
What kind of numbers are we talking about in terms of a
You got
quorum?
8,000 voters?
Yeah.
We average 180 for town meeting or two?
Yeah.
Different town meetings are very different. And that's part of the reason we don't have a quorum, or not why we don't, but the advantage we have is, should a quorum not show up to town meeting,
The
especially.
police department would go out and grab people.
No, I can't do that.
But at the Springtown meeting, we have to pass a budget. If we do not have a quorum, this happens in towns that do have quorums, they cannot do business until they can get a quorum together, which means budgets don't get passed, bills don't get paid. There is a downside to having a quorum.
I think if something's gonna be corrected, and maybe it's not gonna happen drastically, but it to me, doesn't make sense. The other thing is that I understand that the articles are brought up by the clerk, and they're in a certain order. So people go to the town meeting because they want to, and they're gonna go there for the first 3 items that they're interested in, and then they leave. And the past town I was in, the items were picked out of a jar, it was a lottery. And they would say, okay, Article 27 is gonna be first. So you couldn't have this staging where you could say, okay, I know I gotta be there at 9 o'clock. I'm not going here until 9 o'clock.
Just to clarify, clerk has nothing to do with town meeting.
No.
Now,
Town
the
clerk's
select
office has
board
nothing
that
to do with this.
orders the
So-
Somebody put.
order of the articles.
Yeah.
The select board determines that. But that's a valid point though, because we saw it last fall with the school roof thing. There was a group of people, that was their interest, that was their priority, and then
Welcome
everyone
to
just
Norfolk.
left the room.
I grew up in this town, that has happened
Yeah.
every town meeting forever.
And people used to boo and hiss when the people would leave.
Yeah.
The ones that wanted to
The
stay.
issue that I know has been brought up in the past when, I think the order was more arbitrary, I don't know if they ever quite picked out of a hat, but sometimes the school budget items would be towards the end. Well, all the parents complain that, they have kids at home, they can't be having these town meetings that are going to 11, 12 o'clock at night. It's a random order, I kind of like the idea. I'm not actually even sure how the order gets officially set, if it's between advisory, select board.
No, it's just the select board. When I was on the select board, I'm the one that did it. Yeah, and I had a strategy too. And the strategy was, we do the money articles first, and they have to sort of be together. In other words, you couldn't draw a ball out of have a budget, one that was dependent on another. So it gets a little,
The moderator
It's a little crazy.
did associate different warrants and said, okay, this was picked, we will consider Article 9, 10, and 11 because they're all.
yeah,
dealing with
because
the same
they're all
thing.
related.
So he would bunch them together that way.
So we do the budget, then after that, people would be, fatigued and they'd want to have a 5-minute break or something. But instead of having a break, we did some non-controversial articles so we could keep moving. And then one year we had a dog leash ordinance. So that drew a certain crowd. So you have that after that. Then you usually did the zoning articles later. I know this year we moved them up to the front, which didn't work out because they ended up being IP'd anyway. And then you did the boilerplate articles at the end where it didn't require a real crowd to be there, like street acceptances and revolving accounts and those kinds of articles. So those are great.
I mentioned earlier that I would very much like more citizens to be engaged in town government. And So related to this, I'm very disappointed when people show up at town meeting for one article, and as soon as that article is passed, they leave, and they use often the mechanism of calling for reconsideration by somebody who does not want the article reconsidered. He calls for reconsideration in the hopes that the reconsideration will fail, but preclude the possibility of an additional reconsideration. So it's a way of locking in the result so it can't be changed. And we also have in the bylaws, I believe, a requirement or stipulation that something can't be reconsidered more than 3 articles after it was passed or something like that. It also can't be reconsidered in a subsequent evening's meeting. I think all of those things have the effect of making it easier for people to show up for only one article and then leave after that result is locked in. So I would like the study committee to consider bylaw changes that would undo those mechanisms that are used to allow people to escape after the one article they care about. There are several possible approaches. One approach might be to allow articles to be reconsidered at any time during the town meeting. There are other things one could do. The random articles is one way to keep people there, at least until the article that they care about shows up, but that doesn't prevent them from leaving afterwards. So in general, in the spirit of having citizens engaged in the town government, I'd like to see things that bylaw changes which would induce town voters to stay for the entire town meeting.
One of the things that killed town meeting was Proposition 2.5, because it used to be the town meeting was the only place where a budget was approved. And you went, if you didn't want your taxes to go up, you showed up at town meeting, and you have a big crowd, and you stayed through all the budget discussion, which might last several hours, as opposed to the hour we spend on it now. Because if it go over 2.5% now, there's a ballot vote that decides whether or not that budget can go over 2.5%. And whether or not there's a new threshold established from which a budget can go up or down the following year. And that's just been my experience since 1979, was it, Prop 2.5? That's one of the reasons why people don't turn out for town meeting, because they sense that the budget is kind of baked in at a certain percentage, or a maximum of 2.5%, unless there's a real strong reason to have a ballot question. And the select board is in charge of saying whether there'll be a ballot question or not the town meeting.
And so that's an issue of sort of unintended consequences, I think, that there are. It's very tricky to write laws that will have exactly the effect that you want. Often you do something that is well-intentioned and it motivates some other behavior that you weren't anticipating.
One other issue we've considered is the timing of town elections and town meeting and the relationship between the two of them. Whether or not we should have the town election after the town meeting instead of before. And one of the rationales that you might want to do for that is that you have people in office that have spent a year preparing their budgets or whatever warrant articles they want to present. And then they can be presented at town meeting, and then basically the election a week later can be a referendum on whether you liked what they did or not. People running for office. Now the way it works, you have a town election and everything is kind of done before. It would be very hard, for example, if you ran against a certain budget and you won town meeting, really the budget, as we've seen from recent town meetings, the budget is that's pretty much what it is. It doesn't change on the floor. It is what it is.
I actually have a question on the budget. Has it always been, I guess I have a problem that the whole budget is presented under one warrant. You know, and so you've got some pretty large budgets in there that you're voting on, and it's like you're voting all or nothing. And I don't know that that's fair or right to the town. You know, you don't have the opportunity to really look at the budgets individually. And has it always been that way, where they're bundled into one warrant, or?
Bundled into one article,
You know,
at least for the
just-
past 35
and I'll just
years.
take the schools as an example, and I'm not picking on the schools, believe me, but the schools have a, certainly, like we just said, they have a following, you know, and they can bring their people in, they can say, we need you to support the budget, and they vote, but they're not just voting on the school budget, they're voting on everybody's budget, and you really don't have an opportunity to talk about anything.
Right, but you can make an amendment on town meeting floor and specify the movement of money between departments. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
But
You
it's
could
very
say-
hard to do
Yeah.
in practical sense.
Can
But
break out- can
you could
break
say,
out-
take the money from the police, give it to the DPW, and you name the
Yeah,
department numbers and the amount of money. And you could write up an amendment and present the amendment for voting. So, I mean, you can influence the budget itself. And as a citizen at town meeting, you definitely can.
I just think that, well, especially the school budgets, because there's such a large percentage of our town expenditures. They're what, 80% between,
We're about 2/3
yeah, King Phillips and everything else.
school
Yeah.
budgets.
That it really skews the whole budget process, you know, that you're really voting on the school budgets, really, when you vote that.
And we're only allowed by law to vote on the bottom line for a school budget. We can't go
Yeah,
into
right, I
detail. The
understand
other
that.
parts of the
Yeah,
budget, we go through DPW, fire, police, public works, school budgets, it's just the number, and then they can spend it
yeah, I
however they
understand, and
want.
I'm not picking on the school budget, I'm saying you don't get a chance to look at the other budgets, because usually it's the school budgets that are pushing the numbers through.
So 3 separate comments. First, with respect to this, the moderator, both the current moderator and past moderators, have often allowed there to be a hold on specific items within the budget, so that even though there is one omnibus budget article, the moderator has usually permitted a hold so that specific budget items can be discussed. Second item is on the order of elections and town meeting. I think it makes a lot of sense to have the election after the town meeting, not only for the reason that was described here, that that will allow the currently serving elected officials to be active at the town meeting, explaining what they've done and why they've done it and how they've done it, rather than replacing them and coming in with new people right before the town meeting who don't necessarily have a full understanding of the rationale for what's there. Another reason that I favor having the town meeting prior to the election is that prior to the town meeting, the moderator has an organizing committee meeting where he goes through what's going to happen at the town meeting. And if the moderator does that as his organization meeting, and then a new moderator is elected before the town meeting, the new moderator is stuck with not having had an opportunity to arrange what was going to go on. So I think those are multiple reasons that it's better to have the town meeting prior to the election. And I had another item I wanted to mention, and if I can think of it, I'll ask for the microphone.
Well, it is very difficult to be in a position where you're elected and then a week later you're there advocating for something that you ran against. And I had to do that. Because it was because of the situation. Another question is whether or not a town meeting should be later in the year, or in the fiscal year,
Not the election.
not the election.
No, the election later in the year. Town meeting can't go much later in the year.
Well, it can go to beginning of June, when the other two towns, Rentham and Plainville,
Oh,
have
okay,
their
yeah, yeah.
meetings at the beginning of June. Because that's closer, the budget from the state is usually more defined, although this year it wasn't. But you have a better idea what the finances, what the sources of money are going to be.
I remember the other item.
Okay.
At town meeting, various committees make reports about what they've done and perhaps present the budget that they want and justify it. And it has been past practice that those committee reports can be questioned. People can ask for more detail or ask for rationale or in general question the report that's presented. At the most recent town meeting, that was not permitted by the moderator, and it seems to me that that practice is good. I would like to see a bylaw indicating or requiring that citizens have an opportunity to question any reports made at the town meeting.
What about requiring committee reports? So just a concern that I've had, it kind of along those lines is, that's great. I mean, I definitely think that there should be something along where people can ask questions of committees and stuff like that. The problem is what if they don't show up?
So again, with part-time, unpaid volunteer committee members, you can't really force them to do very much. Boards and committees want to give reports because they are looking for support for what they're doing. Like
Yeah.
your committee is looking for more members and is looking to get feedback from townspeople about the things you're working on. Similarly, with a number of other committees, they want support and they're likely to make reports. And I think that if
So you just, I was more asking, like, I mean, do you think we should go as far as to, like, in the bylaws, require a committee send a report that could either be read by the town administrator or send a representative, or leave that aspect of it open, but, you know, if a committee does show up and gives a committee report, the public should be allowed to question.
So I guess I would prefer to see that some report be required, but I would accept a report as brief as so-and-so committee has nothing to report at this time. There need not be substance to it, but I think that the formality of getting them to say either they haven't done anything or that they have something is useful.
Yeah.
It may motivate them to actually do something.
Hopefully.
Okay.
That's just a question. You brought up before about the relationship with the town administrator and the select board, and how does it work? Just a question, because I don't know. Like all of the department heads in town, other than the superintendent of schools, do they all report to the town administrator?
Well, that's a complicated question. So we're going to take, we'll take public safety out because the chiefs have their own set of laws. Our current government structure, yes, they do report to her. The responsibility for hiring and firing is shared between the town administrator and the select board. That's one of the issues, and you'll see that big packet of information, I actually put that together.
Yeah.
That talks about some of the different forms of government, and it really becomes a professionalization and centralization of your town government as you move from just a board of selectmen. You don't even have an executive secretary or town administrator to an executive secretary to a town administrator. I mean, use the term then town manager that generally will have more responsibilities, more direct hiring and firing, to eventually, you get to a full professional type of government. Right now, personally, I feel we have a little bit of an issue in that it's a shared responsibility. It's tough as an employee to know, my boss is the town administrator, but am I also beholden to an elected official who might be changing every year or 3 years or something like that? There's a little bit of confusion or difficulty, shall I say, in that aspect, because we're just at that level of growth of town size. When you're a small little town, it's easy to be a little bit less professional, and when you're a big city, it's easier, you have the resources. We're in that tough middle section right now, I would think. So yes, I mean, the town planner, Rich McCarthy, he reports to Blythe.
Okay.
The building inspector, he reports to Blythe. The chief assessor reports to Blythe. Town clerk is out of this. The town clerk is an elected position, so we don't technically report.
Isn't she responsible for, the town administrator responsible for managing the town government? Town hall?
It's a shared responsibility.
Shared? Is that how it works?
Within our bylaws, there's no clear separation of powers. I mean, she is the on-the-ground, day-to-day running of the town, but again, I would say a difficulty that she runs into is she doesn't have full power. She can't fire, say, Rich McCarthy.
Yeah.
For doing a bad reason. Not necessarily. I mean, does she have to get permission from the select board to do that? I'm not a legal expert, and I don't know necessarily all the case law on that, but I know within our bylaws, it's a murky area. And that's why some towns have moved towards, with charters and other things, to expressly define the powers of a town administrator. They have full hiring and firing, and a select board, their entire job is just policy. They're supposed to be directing the direction and kind of tone of the town government, but it's up to the town administrator to actually do the day-to-day nitty-gritty of the running of it. That's up to the residents of the town if they feel that we're at that level yet.
Who does the superintendent of schools report to?
School committee.
The school committee? And does the school committee report to the select board?
They report to you as a resident.
Right, it's an elected.
Yeah, they're autonomous.
Okay, thank you.
And because we had a few months without a town administrator, and we're down one member on the select board, we had 2 members that were basically trying to do everything that a town administrator does for 2 or 3 months until Blythe was hired. And now we have pretty much a new board. So it's really, your points are well taken, but right now, we don't really know how it's going to shake out as far as what the people that are in the positions right now want to have happen. But, as a board, I think we each have our own opinions as of where overall the responsibility who should have what responsibility. Okay, I guess we're told we have to be out of here by 9 o'clock, so unless we have anything else. One more?
Could we talk about the budgets by departments and how it's developed and how it's reviewed?
That's what the issue is right now.
There was mention at one of the select board meetings about using zero-based budgeting. And I know it takes a little bit of effort and probably going to take some education, but it can be used to weed out all the stuff that's buried, stuff that's,
That's not really a structural, I mean, that's a tone.
Nothing we could do about,
Yeah, that's
but
not
it's-
something that. our
That's
committee has-
obviously something
you
the
can't write a
select
bylaw like
board,
that.
the select
You can't-
board
you
can
can't
do as
change
a
our bylaws
policy
like that.
and say, we want to be presented with a budget that's based on zero-based budgeting.
Say that again?
In other words, the select board, that'd be the direction that the select board would direct, that the town administrator have the departments come up with zero-based budgeting technique and then present that budget to the select
Yeah, well,
board.
they have to substantiate
Instead
every
of,
line item.
instead of the select board doing all that.
I think it should be done, otherwise you don't have any faith, otherwise they're just taking last year's budget and you say, I can't have any increase from last year's budget. Some of them are gonna say arbitrarily, I want 1% more. Well, you have to explain why, maybe it should be 2% less. You're bloated. You're never gonna find that out. Everything keeps going along and along and along.
Well, I don't know if that's anything we can do as a committee,
No, I know,
but I know it's a frustration that's going on in town right now. So thank you very much for coming. We appreciate your input and everything, and we'll take that back with us on our meeting on the 29th. And you're always welcome to attend. We usually meet in the conference room on the second floor next to the selectman's office. And we are looking for, we're always looking for new members. We appreciate your interest.
I just wanted to thank the Town Government Study Committee for holding this forum, for encouraging citizens to come and for listening to what people have to say, so thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.